You can definitely hit
Yeah,
walls in that world.
and ruffle feathers, too.
Oh, if you're ruffling feathers while hitting walls,
Oh
I
yeah,
don't know what you're doing with that duck, but you should let the duck
throwing
go.
that duck against the wall. Isn't it obvious?
This podcast contains the arguably witty banter of two friends, Skippy and Doogles, that like to debate about investing. The content is intended to be entertaining and for informational purposes only, not investment advice. You should do your own research and consult a financial professional before using any of the information in this podcast, and especially before investing.
What you doing?
I'm on a podcast.
Oh, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do that. How's your week, man?
Well, let's just recap. Let's just rewind to last week. I think it's hilarious. We were literally halfway around the world, and we thought we were going to be able to pull off logistics. At least I had hope. I was like,
Yeah.
there's still a
Yeah.
90% chance this is going down. You might hear the airport speaker in the background, or I might be just off a surfboard or something, but this is happening.
That adds flavor. That adds flavor.
Yeah. And it did not happen. Kind of a fun experience in a way.
There was a chance on my original plans when I was in Portugal, flying back from Portugal. There was a chance we might have been able to get something in after landing in Denver,
Yep.
but flight was canceled, rerouted to Munich, which, for the record, if anyone knows geography, that is the wrong direction. That is the wrong direction. And so therefore I got back like a day later. It was a whole thing. So we couldn't really make it happen, unfortunately.
Can we talk just pet peeves with planes? I that is one of my biggest pet peeves is with, like, I was in New Orleans a while back and my flight to Denver got canceled. Actually, my flight to Denver was fine. For some reason they pulled me off the plane like I was a terrorist and told me I wasn't allowed to get on. Sent me to another one where I went Baltimore to Denver. And it's like, do you people, can we look at a map together? Like, this doesn't really make any sense.
You know what else doesn't make sense?
What?
Hiring people for them not to do work.
It does in an everything bubble, Doogles.
Ooh, say more.
Well, okay. The Wall Street Journal, for months, at least 6 months, maybe 2 years, there's been all these TikToks out there of people saying my day at Meta, my day at Google, my day at insert big wealthy tech company, where they like do yoga. They like get in at 10 o'clock, appear to do nothing and leave, and then they post publicly about it. And what did you see what was your reaction when you saw this? Because I always thought it was a joke, like it was made up. It wasn't actually true.
I didn't think it was a joke.
Well, the Wall Street Journal went out, found 5 of those people, did real live interviews, talked to them, and you're right, Douglas. It was not a joke. There is a hypothesis here that some of these companies hired out a competition with their competitors to say, we have more employees than you, but we don't really need that. There's some speculation that they hired people simply because they thought they might need them in a year or two, or they wanted to keep the talent away from their competitors. I just want to say that's a great problem to have. When I talk hiring decisions with companies I work with, it's usually like, oh, we can do that, but the finances are going to be really tight. Or like, I know you want 10, but we might only need 8. You ever been in a company like this that's just like, hey, go hire 5,000 people. We'll figure it out.
Never been in a company with 5,000 people, let alone. So no.
There's an example of here. One recruiter came from Microsoft, got a $70,000 a year bump to go to Meta. And this was her expectations for the first year or two. Goes, granted, she's a recruiter. We're not going to worry about you hiring anyone for your first 12 months. We're just going to get you accustomed to the culture. Sounds like she worked about 3.5 hours a day on average. And worked means sits in meetings and hits the yoga studio. I don't know why this is so hard for me to comprehend, but this is bonkers.
This individual, I'm sure, is talented.
Yeah.
Good at their job. And they wouldn't have to be talented and good at their job to do the job that was asked of them for the first year. It would be a small list of people, right, that should be eliminated from consideration for a job in which you ask them to come into the company and not do anything for a year?
Well, and not to pick on this individual, but like a recruiter at Meta, a recruiter at Google, a recruiter at Microsoft, a recruiter at Apple, your pay is better than almost any other place in the industry. It's not that hard to recruit there. Like it's not the toughest job to start with.
Well, actually, it seems like it is. Do you know how hard it would be for you to recruit people if you were asked not to recruit people?
It's a good, if I was in that position, I feel like I'd get fired because I wouldn't be able to not do my job. And I would have hired like 17 people. They'd be like, what are you doing? I'd be like, well, I'm a recruiter and you hired me. So I'm actually doing my job, regardless of what you tell me. If you tell me to slow my roll, too bad.
That's my whole thing. Imagine, so you're a great engineer, software engineer. Somebody hires you and they go, all right, Samuel, here's your desk. Take a seat. Here's your keyboard. We got a couple monitors up for you. Let's fire up Atom or whatever your favorite text editor, code editor is. Here are instructions for like how we deploy, whatnot. And here's the only catch. If you write any code, I swear to you, Samuel, if I see any code from you for 1 year, every day there will be a pop quiz on our culture that you must pass. But if I see any code, whoo,
that guy just sits at his computer sweating, making
exactly.
sure he doesn't.
How do I night write? He fixed a bug, out the door.
I mean, I don't know that I'm saying anything intelligent here, but I'm just flabbergasted. When I saw these stories, I thought people were heavily embellishing what they were asked to do. And they're now on the record in a publication like the Wall Street Journal saying that's not the case and detailing why. And that's fascinating to me.
Yeah. There was a piece that we put on the Substack in the hot take section, I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. I can't remember. We'll put it back on today, along with this one that was written by Emmanuel Maggiore. And it's called, I've been employed in tech for years, but I've almost never worked. And he writes out what the cultures of the organizations were like, right, that he was at, how this happened. It's a really well-written piece. There's one quote that I'm going to pull from here that I think is it's not a different side, but it's like a different view, a different perspective on this too. So it says, employees' focus is all too often on doing their tasks as requested in the allotted time frame without questioning their business value and while following the methodology to the letter. What I think is interesting about this is it's also saying like we're hiring people to not do work, and we're hiring people, and I'm going to make an assumption that these people are very talented and good at their jobs, and we're also hiring them without an intention for them to think for themselves. If you think about what many of these organizations are valued at, let's bring it back to investing. Like what investors expect from many of these organizations is innovation, new thought, going outside the box, pushing the limits. And when you're hiring people to not do jack or hiring people just to like follow a process, how's that going to end well?
It's not. But the flip side of Emmanuel's quote is, and I agree with his take. I loved this article. Gosh, guys, if you have 5 minutes and you have any experience with like software design or agile processing, you will enjoy this because it will ring true for you. I'm often the person back when I was in the corporate world that would always say, why am I doing this? Is there a better way to do this? Can I add more value here? And sometimes I roast people the wrong way too. So I understand both sides of that. Yeah. There's a reason some people almost get beat down and do whatever they're told, however they're told to do it without critical thought.
Yeah, I get that. You can hit walls. You can definitely hit walls in that world.
And ruffle feathers too.
Oh, if you're ruffling feathers while hitting walls,
oh yeah,
I don't know what you're doing with that duck, but you should let the duck
run that duck against the wall. Isn't it obvious? I mean,
run the duck against the wall. All right, can I fishbowl it for Undelis? All right, I'm gonna hop into the fishbowl, and I want to talk about this Jason Zweig piece. So we bring up Jason all the time. Writes for the Wall Street Journal, has his own blog as well. Jason is a kind of, it's a different way, but I would put Jason in like the William Green bucket of world, where like Jason is not known to be an investor, or not known for being an investor, but is known for understanding knowledge within the investing world. They're also different in a number of ways, but love Jason stuff. He wrote this piece that is a summary of wrote this blog post that is a summary of articles that he's written over the last couple of years, and it's called The 7 Virtues of Great Investors. I'm going to walk through some of these virtues. We can stop where you find interest. What I want to say before we hop into this is what this is not, and what Jason is not saying this is this is not the 7 things you do to become a great investor. It is not the 7-step process to get 80% returns. I don't know why I went 80. I could have said anything like lower than that. It would have been ridiculous. What this is when you look at great investors, what are attributes that come out, right? And so something you say all the time, which I think is great, is like, you can't just read something from Buffett and then become Buffett. Like, that's not the way it works. But these are attributes that he sees. You want to say something before I hop in?
Well, I mean, that's all of that. TikTok investors has gone crazy again in the last month, and there's so much garbage out there of there's so much garbage that hasn't even read Buffett, that they're not even pretending to read Buffett. But yeah, I just say, guys, 99% of it is absolute trash. Just run away.
That's one of the traits here. So one thing I'll actually, there's a quote in here that he pulls from Benjamin Graham. It's intelligence is a trait more of the character than of the brain. I want to state that before we get into the 7 things. I love that. It makes me think about poker a lot as well, because poker's it's a game of math and a game of psychology. And that means that if you just understand all the math and go in, then you've like checked a box, but it's a lot more about how you perceive the table, how you carry yourself, your discipline. It's all this other stuff. All right, here are the 7. 1, curiosity. This is not a quote, but none of these, most of what I'm about to say are not quotes from what he says. It's like my paraphrasing, but I would say like what he means by it. Curiosity. Always be learning. Okay. Don't be afraid of what you don't know, but what you do. I think that's like really interesting. Definitely think about what you don't know and like be curious and go learn it. But the fear part, I think, is one important. What he's saying is that there are non-great investors are afraid of all the things, like FOMO. They're afraid of all the things that they don't know. We said great investors, they look to where am I biased in this? Like, what are the things I think I know that aren't true? Number 2, skepticism. And just hop in and interrupt me at any point. Skepticism is number 2. And this is getting back to what you talked about. Investing content, which he calls propaganda, is basically full of a bunch of nonsense. He's saying the industry, what it does is throw a whole lot of numbers out there at you and say, because we know all these numbers, that means that we are credible. And a great investor will look at everything with skepticism.
I mean, also the sell-side analysts that often cover these stocks are presenting a case. It betters their career to be liked by the company, so they get more inside access to the company. So their tilt is not always, frequently favorable to the company, and that gets presented as an expert view of the company. Absolutely.
Yep. 3rd, independence. Don't let others do thinking for you. I really like this one. This is also the one that brought me back to saying, again, these are not follow these steps, you become a great investor. Because as we all constantly say, is the vast majority, 90+% of people should just buy SPY or VTI or some low-cost index fund, right? Which is letting the market do the thinking for you, right? In that case. But this is saying, don't just take what somebody is saying as like genius. And then,
well, if you can't be independent, you can't outperform. First and foremost. And what I think most people do is they run a portfolio that's not SPY or VTI or whatever, but they mirror that index. And so they spend a lot of time getting similar and probably worse returns. If you can't be independent, don't even bother. Just download Wealthfront and move on.
It's true. It costs too much, both from like a mental bandwidth perspective and your time. It costs too much.
Yeah.
All right. The fourth thing is about humility. Just assume you're wrong. Always. It kind of gets back to skepticism and curiosity. Both those points too. Like, look at what you do. They look at what they do and they assume it's wrong, and you test it and all that jazz. The next one's discipline. Follow your process. And the points that he actually brings up here are more about the environment. So he brings up an example of Templeton. Templeton moved from New York to the Bahamas, and brings up Buffett. Buffett moved from New York back to Omaha. And that's just about environment. So follow your process and be in an environment, surround yourself with people, et cetera, where you can follow your process, where you aren't just distracted by all the things that are happening out in the world, but you can be disciplined.
Yeah, I loved like Guy Spear picked Switzerland to get out of the rat race in New York. Williams Green has detailed this with a bunch of different investors, but a lot of times the folks in sleepy towns like Omaha, or there's lots of good investors in Southern California like Howard Marks and Charlie Munger, and by design, getting out of a place like New York City probably improves your returns.
Personally, I chose my basement. The next one.
There you go. There we go.
The next one is patience. This is a long-term thing. We hit on this constantly. Like, this is a long-term. Like, treat it like it's long-term. You got to be patient. And the last is courage. This one probably gets a whole bunch of peeps into trouble with this one, but it's courage. Like, you got to make that bet. You got to make that bet. And then this quote I really liked, and also will get a lot of people into trouble. Here's the quote from the piece. You can be pretty sure you're manifesting courage as an investor when you listen to what your gut tells you and then do the opposite.
There we go. Mic drop on that.
For show. There's an eighth trait that was not in here that I'll state. But it's an important one, right? It's an important one. You're right. Like, your investments are good. It's like the other one. You can be curious, skeptical, independent, humble, disciplined, patient, and courageous about your apes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like,
well, right? That's Seth Klarman, basically. He always talks about you have to be different and right. And so few people are, basically. Yeah. It could be as high as 99% of people. So really good traits. But Doogles, it's like an interesting discussion, because you're right. This isn't a template of how to do it. This doesn't mean, even if you understand this doesn't mean you'll be able to do it. It's kind of just like talking points.
Yeah, exactly. I would think of it as if you look back on like your returns and you go, I was curious, I was skeptical, I was patient, all this stuff, and my folio's down, right? This is a bunch of garbage. That's not the right way to use it. What I think is the right way to use it is, as you're thinking about yourself, like your own traits, right? The way that you're acting, and you go, can I just let me double check myself? Am I being curious enough? Am I being skeptical? Am I being that's just the way to do it. It's not like there's no so what from the other side automatically. So I just think it's a good check and balance for yourself.
Yep. I'm going to jump into the fishbowl like a duck. And I'm going to pull out one of my favorite topics, which continues to be real estate. First, we're only going to talk about this briefly, but the REIT index in the U.S. is at a 14-year low. You can find REITs out there trading at mid-90s prices. And I am loving it, digging in a little, adding a few small positions in REITs. I do not recommend that for anyone, absolutely anyone. And there's a couple of reasons why. Most of these REITs, and that's a real estate investment trust if you don't know, and I've been looking at commercial REITs. Most of these REITs have built their business on debt, and that debt matures at different periods, and they built a business where you could get mortgages at 3%. You can't do that anymore. And in addition to that headwind, you have the headwind, say it's like a office property, of there being significantly less need. So very easily the value of your portfolio could be worth half of what it used to be worth, and sometimes more than that, depending on how much debt you're using, depending on the demand of your properties, depending on if your properties are unique or people can just go elsewhere. Foreclosures are going to happen, and this space is going to be incredibly challenged. But I love to live in the garbage heap, and there's some fascinating stuff out there. So that's the REIT side. On the homeownership side, there is a chart that came out this week that specifically talks about FHA home buyers, which are home buyers that appear to have slightly lower credit quality. And the way the Federal Housing Authority steps in is they kind of provide a backstop to those loans. So mortgage companies can issue those without taking on all the risk. Did I state that correctly, Douglas?
I think directionally it seems right to me, from what I understand.
Perfect. So you can look at a debt to income ratio of those FHA home buyers going back to like 1998. And debt to income at that time was about 35%. It spiked up to 41% in 2008 and then kind of came back down to earth. It's currently at what we believe is an all-time high, according to Fannie Mae, 43.5% debt to income ratio.
It's high.
So this ties into what I talked about 3 weeks back with home affordability being at all-time lows. I mean, it's effectively saying the same thing in a different way. It ties into another chart floating around this week from Goldman Sachs Investment Research that compares the cost of a mortgage payment, basically mortgage payment to income ratio versus rent to income ratio. And this is maybe the best time to rent comparably since at least 1990. Like this stuff is just everywhere and screaming from the treetops that what we have done with home affordability is not sustainable. And I just am kind of waiting for the whole thing to blow up. And it's not like blow up in a 2008 fashion because the problems are different. Anyway, let me pause.
And you're saying blow up from the real estate, like if you just take that lens, or are you saying more broadly?
Well, and then real estate has ramifications everywhere else.
Yeah,
I'm just saying it's not sustainable. Like no one has money to pay their mortgage, and I'm exaggerating there.
And everything else. Yeah, but I know what you mean. Yeah, it is this as a precursor or as a proxy for like general health, financial health is kind of scary. I fully agree. And coupling this or combining this with all the other stuff that we see of like people going into more debt, even buy now, pay later. I mean, that's like you can't afford your toaster. Now you can't afford your house. What you want to put your toaster in? You know, I mean, it's like it's a really honestly, I mean, just like all kidding aside, like it is scary. The punch bowl is gone, but no one seems to realize it.
You said what you gonna put your toaster in, like your toaster is your most important possession. I love it. You really
where am I gonna put my duck? Where am I gonna put my toaster?
It's like it doesn't matter if I have a house or not. I'm gonna have a toaster. Let me tell you.
It's a brave little toaster, you know. You ever watch that movie back in the day?
About a toaster?
Not just any toaster, but a toaster was both brave and little.
It's called the Brave Little Toaster? No.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. This toaster needed it. Anyway, I'm gonna get it's probably a terrible film, but I watched it as a kid and loved it. Okay.
Yeah. To put a bow on this, like it's just clear to me that real estate prices have to come down. Now, there's another narrative out there, which I'm not sure if it's true or not, which is there's no inventory right now. So basically, potential sellers have said they got used to the inflated prices from 3% interest rates. And so they see what a realtor says their house is worth now, and they go, I'm not selling for that. Like, I have a 3% mortgage. Why would I do that? And potential buyers are going, are you serious? I'm not doing 40% debt to income and paying a 7% rate. Like, there's just kind of gridlock out there because everyone is used to the way it used to be for the last decade, and adjusting to the world as it is today is really, really hard for humans to do.
I have nothing to add on to that. I just agree. Yeah. I just agree.
Go for it. What's in your fishbowl?
I want to talk about active management performance. We touch on this a bunch. So apologies if you don't want to hear about it, but it's about to be heard about. And there are a couple things I want to hit on. The first thing I want to hit on is the S&P Dow Jones indices came out with their annual report where they look at the previous year and say, how did active managers perform? So I'm going to go through some stats there. These are stats we've hit on a few times, and I'm just like drilling in the fact that underperformance is a thing for active managers. You do what you will with that information. Okay. But I just want to drill it in. But this past year, 2022, active managers were rejoicing. They were hitting the streets. They were popping in bottles. Do you know why?
No, tell me.
Because only 51% of active managers underperformed.
It's huge. It's like best year on record.
This is the least underperforming year, which is the only way you can really say this. This was the least underperforming year that they've had in the last 20 years. And so people are going wild. And what the Dow Jones folks were saying is they were like, I mean, it was such a weird year that you chose this one contrarian thing, happened to get lucky, and that meant that only 51% of you, like, it's kind of it's like sad. Like, it just feel bad for them. But people are rejoicing. I should say one of but one of the least underperforming years. And that was at 51%. The other thing I want to hit on here is, and this is what I feel like last time I talked about this, you gave me funny eyes, but I want to get your view on this, because for me, it's telling, but maybe it shouldn't be, is I look at what is the performance 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, right? Which they lay out. And for me, when you look at your annual returns across those different time horizons, it should go up, at least generally speaking. Like the longer the time horizon, the higher the return, generally speaking, I believe, for you to feel confident in your investing. Because if you say, like, just to be simple, if you're like, and I say generally speaking, because you can have like your 1 year, a 1 year is kind of an anomaly. It's like 1 year might be 30% return. And that doesn't mean if you're 3 years lower that's worse. But I'd say, like, you should look at your 3, 5, and 10 and say, like, if I happen to have like a lucky 3 years, but my 10 years is really bad, then I should probably say like the 10 year is the more reliable indicator than my 3 year. Like, that's kind of what I mean. So let me,
well, 10-year, no doubt, a 10-year performance figure is more reliable than a 3-year. But the way my investing style works, and maybe this isn't about me, is like I might hang with the S&P 500 for 5 years, and then I might do 50% when it does 8. And so to just completely disregard a year or two of fabulous performance is also, like, for some people, that's their whole secret sauce too.
Yeah, but that should increase your 5 year then. If you're the same as the S&P 500 for 4 years and you beat it by 50%, then your 5 year is greater than the S&P 500.
Yeah, but your 1 year's off the charts.
Yes.
And
so that's what I'm saying. You got to throw the 1 year out. Like, the 1 year is the one that's like, that's weird. But if you look like over 5, 10, 20, right? Like,
completely.
And it's kind of like, if you look, I'm making numbers up here, but if you look at Berkshire Hathaway, for example, look at like their 40 year, their 30 year, their 20 year, their 10 year, they're looking decades and decades, but they're like, yeah, the last 10 years didn't do all that great compared to the S&P 500. Let's go ahead and talk about our 30, 40, 50, right? And when I, generally speaking, you can look across this in like a variety of different like benchmarks that the actives measure against. But generally speaking, when you look at how those different categories break down, they get worse the longer period of time that you end up looking at them. And I think that is like, that's a thing for me that I kind of just go, well, like, I don't know. Like, what do you do with that? Right? Like, I it's telling for me. I don't know if it's telling for anybody else, but it's telling for me.
Yeah, that's where I give you the eye roll, because because it mean reverts, right? So like it should, your 20 year, and to be fair, like, your example with Berkshire is hilarious, because you said, like, let's look at the 50-year track record. Well, so few people have a 50-year track record because they go bust and are out of the industry. That we don't have. That's that privilege.
True. That's very true.
But
let me see your 50-year. I could just picture if Warren Buffett was like more like, I don't know, virile. Like, if Warren Buffett was just to be like, let me see your 50-year track record. Let me see it.
But you got to get me off topic, because the whole Chamath angle letter, in last year he compared himself to Buffett, and he thought he was looking better than Buffett, but it was effectively all leverage. Just don't compare yourself to Buffett, people. It's a dumb idea in any metric, he'll just be like, oh yeah, look at this, I'm better, look at this, I bet. Like, he's just better. There's no equal.
he, he is better. He is just better. All right. I'll get another eye roll when I bring this up next time too. I'll get another eye roll, but I'm looking forward to it.
I do want to give a shout out to a book I read that I just found hilarious. It's from the memos of Alan Greenberg, and he was the CEO of Bear Stearns in the 80s. And these things are classic, man. He had a couple key principles. His first is he would encourage people to hire PSD employees. Any guesses on what PSD might mean?
No.
Poor, smart, with a desire to get rich. Go okay. On and on.
That sounds like some Gordon Gekko stuff.
I mean, yeah. So they're at the heart of Manhattan in investing, right? You'd think they'd want the Harvards and the Columbias and whatever. No, he wanted the smart guy off the street that was eager to work hard. Like, that was his entire hiring philosophy. This guy's a total character. He made up fictitious individuals that he would quote in the memos as consultants, which I absolutely love, because instead of writing the 10 million or the $50 million check for the consultants, he said exactly what he knew those consultants would tell him through a fictional character. And so he'd be like, I talked to Harold Carmichael today. I forget the guy's exact name. And he told me this, and like, run in the streets and follow his direction. And then on top of all that, he ran this company with eye on cost like I have never seen. And as a value investor, you got to respect that, Doogles. So first thing he did in 1985, he stopped purchasing rubber bands, and he encouraged everyone in the company to save the paper clips that were mailed to them. I mean, this is a different time. Email's not really around, right? So everything is being mailed back and forth. So in addition to that, with saving those paper clips, he told the purchasing department to stop buying staplers and staples. And he estimated this saved the company something like $80,000 a year. Again, this is 1980 prices. To take this a step further, for interoffice mail, he instructed the secretaries basically to start licking the left side of the envelope. So the receiving party could reuse the envelope and lick the right side of the envelope. And then he said, and if we get really good about this, we'll leave some room in the center so we can reuse it a third time. Like, this guy's just, I just loved it. Check it out. I think it's $3 on Kindle or something. Just loved it. He's insane.
This just has you written all over it. Did you get some ideas for yourself?
Well, so it actually made me feel guilty, because I've gotten pretty lax on the expense front, and it gave me some ideas for sure.
If I get a letter from you with a half-licked envelope, can you do like a call and collect, right? You call somebody, collect, they have to pay for the call. Can you have like a collect? Can you have like a collect stamp? Like, you send me something, half-licked envelope, and the mail person's like knocking on my door, like, can I get
Doogles, 70 cents? You know that I put your address on the return address. Send it, drop it off at the post office. It's got to be the way.
Does that work?
I don't know. Let's try it. No, okay. So sorry. Kind of jokes aside, what's amazing about this is something you and I talked about off pod. There's this culture. There are some companies, and the reason I talked about this was there's some buzz in the news about Google cost-cutting measures. And I don't specifically want to talk about that, but like, there's a lot of companies that send mixed messages, right? They travel expensively, they host big parties, and then they say, oh, but don't you dare use rubber bands. And it's like, wait, but you know how much of a fraction of the cost that is compared to all these other large expenses that are on your books? You know, maybe it's you give massive bonuses and then you're really concerned about people having a breakfast that costs more than $8, whatever the case may be. The thing that's so impressive about Alan Greenberg, and it would have been challenging to work there, because every decision. Like, he is on top of every expense decision as the CEO of the company. I think that really can wear you down. But the thing that's amazing about it is he's true to that. And that was clearly ingrained in the company. There was no lavish parties. There was no, every expense was thought about with great detail. And I kind of think you have to pick one or the other, right? You can choose to focus on expenses and focus on every expense, or not, but don't get caught in the middle, because that's a tough place to be.
Look at you. I thought this was just about licking half envelopes, but you actually got things to say.
I got a follow-up question for you.
Okay.
What's the right approach
to what?
Well, I've been in organizations that have no one like Alan Greenberg, but that have been really focused on expenses and often felt like they missed big opportunities to bring in more revenue because that was the sole focus. And I've been in places that have kind of done the we don't know game, where there's some expenses that they really focus on, others that are completely ignored, and they do take advantage of big opportunities. And then I think in the startup world's Doogles, like, because of the impact that Google and others had on Silicon Valley, there was a lot of people that took the reverse approach that was like, we're going to have lavish rewards and we're going to go grow our company. We're not going to worry about expenses. So, like, I know you can be successful in 1,000 different ways here, but have you seen a place, or do you have an opinion about the right approach here?
There isn't a right approach. I think you named a couple of things in here. In my view, there isn't a right approach, but I think there are a couple of things you named. One, it has to be authentic. And two, as a business, you need to make money. You have to, and by make money, I'm talking like you have to spit out cash. Like, that's a thing that needs to happen. And so it depends on what your funding structure is, what business you're in, and what's authentic to the culture of the organization. To me, like, that's it. You can do this in a wide variety of ways, in my opinion, but you have to end up making money. And a lot of times, from things that I've seen, not necessarily like companies I've been in, but like read about, heard about, whatever the version of the lavish party is not about the lavish party when it's done well. It's about the culture of the organization, the feeling of camaraderie, etc. And even that, when you look at the ROI, it's that the thing that this does for the mindset of the individuals feeds the business, right? Yep. It's not about the lavish party. If you're having lavish party for lavish party's sake, like, that doesn't go well. That's my view.
Awesome. That's fair. I agree.
Cool. That's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Thanks, guys. Hit skippydoogles.com for all things Skippy Doogles. I mentioned it before, the Substack is really awesome. Get you all the reference materials we use on a weekly basis. What am I missing, Doogles?
We love that listener mail. skippydoogles@gmail.com. And please rate and review. Go hit that stars or whatever the version of stars is on the podcast platform you listen to. Appreciate you all.
Sweet. Thanks for hanging out with us. Peace.